Okay, good evening. I'd like to call to order the July 16th, 2015 meeting of the City of Bellingham Planning Commission and ask everyone to silence electronic devices at this time, phones, laptops, anything that's going to make a noise during our meeting. Thank you. Heather, would you please call the roll?
Holly Teichie.
Here.
Garrett O'Brien.
Here.
Tom Grinstead.
Here.
Jeff Brown.
Here.
Phyllis McKee.
Here.
Steve Crooks.
Here.
Cerise Noah.
Here.
All right, thank you. So we haven't had a meeting in a while, or at least it feels like it, and we have 3 sets of minutes to approve. Does anyone feel like we need to go through these individually, or could I just ask for a nod of heads for all 3 sets of minutes? Is that okay? Okay, let's get a nod of heads if these are all approved. Okay. All 3 sets of minutes are approved. That's the April 30th, May... We have 4 sets? I'm sorry. Heather? I don't think we're ready to approve that. Is that the June 11th? Okay, no, this was just in reference to the April 30th, May 7th, and June 4th minutes. That's what we received in advance. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move into our public comment period. This is an opportunity for anyone from the public who's here to talk about anything other than the topic of tonight's meeting, which is the comprehensive plan update process. So if you'd like to speak about anything else, you can come up to the podium. You have 3 minutes to talk to us. And please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Julie Guy, and I live at 4559 El Dorado. And I want to clarify something with you, Ali. Did you just say that if my subject is on the comprehensive plan, that's not appropriate right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We're going to give, if you're willing to hang out through the meeting, we're going to give everyone an opportunity to make a comment about the work session topic at the end of the work session tonight.
So a little bit later.
Yeah, and if we may let everyone speak at the beginning if there's just a few you here. So yeah, a little bit later.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so anybody else want to speak regarding any topic other than the comprehensive plan update? Okay, so seeing nobody, we're going to close the public comment period for this meeting. So we have a work session tonight on the comprehensive plan update, but we also have a set of findings of fact from our last meeting that staff prepared for us at our direction after the last meeting, and I think we should have a vote on those before we start the work session, just so we can move that off of our agenda and go into the comp plan update clean. So let me find these real quick. They are the Bellingham Planning Commission finding of facts, conclusions, and recommendations for the 2036 population growth forecast and UGA boundary review. And Greg, do you want to talk about these at all, or?
Well, I just would say that I want to make sure that the findings accurately capture your discussion, the facts that led you to the conclusions that are included, and also that the recommendations that we got it all right. And that's basically it. If you're comfortable with the document, that it represents your position, then it would be appropriate to approve them. We're happy to make any changes if you think we left anything out or misstated anything. These findings will go forward to the council and then perhaps ultimately to the county, just to explain the recommendations that we're making. We don't normally prepare findings for something like this when we're just making a recommendation, but we thought this was an important enough subject and you all took enough time that we thought it was appropriate to do it this time, just so that there's a clear record of what you did and why you did it, what you're recommending and why.
Anybody have any comment? Well, I thought that they did a very good job of summarizing what probably was difficult, because we had a pretty broad-ranging discussion over the course of 3 or 4 meetings. So I was comfortable with them after reading them. We probably need a motion if there's one to be made. Jeff?
We received a public comment letter via email in the past couple days, and I just wondered if you had had a chance to look at that and compare that with the findings of fact and make sure that it is very clear how we arrived at our conclusion in a sequential manner, because we kind of went all over the place over the course of this session, this sequence of meetings, but also the earlier one that I wasn't at last year. And I just want to make sure that it's extremely clear how we got to that conclusion and that that is supported in what we're going to be putting forward.
Yeah, from our perspective, we think it's clear.
Okay. Okay, then. Does anyone want to offer a motion?
So moved.
Approved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, then Phyllis's motion would be to recommend that the Planning Commission findings of fact, conclusions, and recommendations on the 2036 population growth forecast and UGA boundary review from June 11th, 2015 be forwarded to council as recommended, as written, yeah. And we had a second, so unless there's any more discussion, we can have a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you. Now we can get into the work session, which is on the chapters themselves and how we're going to tackle this whole thing. So, staff, would you like to start us out?
Sure. Good evening, I'm Lisa Poole with the Planning Office. So this work session tonight is to talk about some key themes for the comprehensive plan update that we'll want to focus on through staff's review process, as well as your review process and the public's review process. And so the objectives for tonight, we're going to go over the scope of the update with you, review the plan's existing policy framework, and then brainstorm 3 to 5 focus areas to inform the plan's changes. So as we've brought to you before, the scope of the update, it's not an overhaul of the existing plan. We're really focusing on these areas that are listed in the slide. The focus areas are the subject tonight. We don't have those identified yet, and I'll talk some more about that in the next few slides. But the new plan will, of course, include new public input, and so far we've had an open house. We have an Engage Bellingham website specific to the project where folks can go online and answer questions, provide feedback that way. We've had a survey. We've had focused small group meetings with neighborhoods and interested citizens. We've met with the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Committee several times. So we've had lots of public input to date, and more is coming. We also have an open house scheduled for September 15th. So more details will be coming on that. We'll also have new formatting for the plan. The economic development chapter that was adopted a few years ago will serve as sort of the new format for the rest of the chapters. Since the last plan was adopted in 2006, the City Council has adopted some legacies and strategic commitments for the city. So those need to be incorporated into the comp plan, and those are really focused on quality of life, sense of place, healthy community, safe community, lots of great aspects that are already in the plan, but we need to include those as well. Changes in state law since the last update, and we've identified a few of those so far include airport compatibility and active living, and we've already had some meetings with the port on the airport policies, and we've also been meeting with the Whatcom Health Department on active living policies, and they'll be bringing forward some recommendations for us to include. And then refined goals and policies. We're going to look for outdated language and remove that, and then we're also going to consolidate goals and policies where there might be some redundancy or overlap. And then, of course, the new 20-year population and employment forecast, which the Planning Commission's recommendation will go to the City Council for a public hearing on July 27th. So that's coming up in just a few weeks. So I just wanted to go through, as I stated, the policy foundation or the visions that are in Chapter 1. We're not going to be significantly changing those. Those were all based on some great extensive public input that occurred in the past, and we feel like they're still valid today. We're going to go through those and see if there's anywhere where we might be able to consolidate, refine those a little bit, but these are the general areas that the visions and the framework policies fall underneath. So the focus areas that we're here to talk about tonight, this is a way to really focus, like I said, staff's review going through the chapters as well as the review for Planning Commission, City Council, and the public. Typically, I think how the city has done it in the past, we start at page 1 and go through each page, each goal and policy, what needs to change, a lot of critique on those specific elements. And this time around, since it is not an overhaul, we're proposing that we pull out some organizing principles, focus areas, whatever you want to call them, and then look at each chapter through the lens of that particular focus area. And the example I pulled out here was implementing urban villages. So if we picked that as a focus area, we would then go through each chapter and make sure that all of the goals and policies related to those have been updated and that the chapters are consistent with each other in that particular focus area. So staff did some brainstorming just initially to see, what we think might be some potential ideas for that. And these are the topics that we brainstormed. And this is all based on the process we've had to date, the public input, the open house, the surveys, all the Planning Commission and City Council meetings, what we've heard so far, family wage jobs, balancing environmental protection with economic development and density, urban growth areas that have been difficult to annex, health, and that's a broad definition of health, environmental, economic, social, housing choices and affordability, implementation of the existing urban village plans, and the new economy. How do we move forward in this era of folks working from home and doing a lot of business online, and it's different than what we've seen in the past. So those are some topics just to get the conversation started. And what we'd like to do after tonight is then we've got a few other work sessions scheduled with you, and we can dive into some of these in a little more detail, see what they might look like for our review going forward. So these are just the questions that we wanted to ask tonight. Did these topics reflect the most significant issues facing the community? What's missing? What handful should we focus on moving forward? And before we get into those questions, I have a slide that goes over the upcoming meetings specific to the comp plan. There's a lot going on over the next few months, and those in blue are the ones that are the city council meetings that are focused on the growth forecast and the UGA boundaries. We've got 727, 810, 831, and then the ones in black are the work sessions specific to the focus areas. We have a tentative joint work session scheduled for September 17th and then an open house scheduled for September 15th in Old City Hall, 6 to 8, and there'll be a lot more information coming on that. But for now, I'll go back to those questions and I'll sit down and we can get the discussion started unless you have any questions right now.
Are there any questions right now? No? Jeff?
Well, I do have one, and I guess this is a top level, higher level question, but it seems to me that, if you look at the current comp plan, and I've heard many times that anybody can read whatever they want into it because there are somewhat conflicting objectives depending on how you weigh things. But I'm just curious, as part of this, is there some degree of analysis of what's already in the plan but hasn't really worked because there are barriers that need to be identified so that you can say, yeah, the comp plan has these objectives, they're very nice. Urban villages might be an example. But they haven't actually happened to the extent that we would hope they would happen. So what has caused that and what needs to get fixed? Is it a comp plan issue, a code issue, something else that drives the process? But it seems like having some understanding of that might help frame the discussion in addition to just talking about what areas we should dial in on, just knowing what's worked and what hasn't worked and why, before we even talk about changes to the comp plan, what else is out there, you know? It's impact fees, you know? If the price of a lot goes up to $120K in City of Bellingham, that's kind of a problem, and it doesn't matter what policies you have if the economics are driving in the opposite direction. So I guess that's my kind of point is barriers and what hasn't worked and what can we consider before we start chewing through the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, that will absolutely be part of the discussion. In terms of urban villages, for example, the example that you used, we've had some that have been pretty successful and some that haven't, and we need to look at why that is, and are there things that we can do from a policy level, things that the city can do to change that, to encourage things to start happening in certain villages. They'll look at the ones that are doing well, what's worked, what hasn't. The same thing with housing affordability, and we can go through and pull out all of the pieces that are in the various chapters of the plan that have to do with housing affordability or housing choice, so that you're looking at the full spectrum of the goals and policies and the language in the plan, rather than just going chapter by chapter, sort of looking at things in isolation. So, yeah.
So does that happen early in the process, or does that happen once we pick the focus areas and we go through the council, that joint meeting I saw on the agenda, and you identify the main areas, and if it's not a main area, it doesn't really get talked about, or?
Well, we'd like to know what the big topics are. That doesn't mean we can't, along the way, talk about something that comes up or something that isn't in one of the main topic areas, but we'd really like to get a handle on those 4 or 5, whatever it turns out to be, issues that are, the most significant challenges that we face. That's the way I kind of like to think about it. What are the most significant challenges that we face and that we will face over the next 22 years in terms of comprehensive planning, land use, housing choice, housing affordability, transportation issues, environmental issues. We'd really like to get those identified and get agreement from you and then from council on what those are, so we can get started with that, basically.
Some of these topics will probably overlap in those discussions. I'm just thinking about it. I think it's a really good question. What's working and what's not. But I look at like housing choice, affordability, and implementation of existing urban village plans, and what we do to incentivize urban village development is going to influence our housing choice and affordability. And so it's important for me to know that if we pick 3 or 5 of these, that it doesn't preclude us from a broader discussion if it sounds like that's not the case. That I don't want to take us all over the place. I understand you're trying to focus it, but it seems like there's some fluidity between these things.
Sure.
Do you think that there's some overriding things that staff is looking out at this 20-year window and is concerned about, like our job base or our land use or our, anything particular? I mean,
well, when we talked about it, we came up with a list that I think Lisa showed you. There we go. And that's just that was just brainstorming on the staff level, but those are there's 7 of them. Those are pretty significant issues, and some of them probably can be combined, and we'll get into, like you said, there's some overlap there. Family wage jobs in the new economy, for example. Housing choices and affordability. Health is an area where, not environmental health, but more of the social aspects of health is something that's not very well addressed in our current plan. Urban growth areas that have been difficult to annex, you guys have just been through a discussion regarding those areas, so you have a good understanding of what the issues are, and that's something that we'd really like to address and hopefully make some progress on. That's a fairly important issue for us. We've got these areas that are sort of in limbo, right? They're not being annexed, they're not seeking annexation, and yet there's urban levels of development there. The city's providing the services. Those folks that live in those areas, and there are a lot of them, are, driving on city streets and using the library and the aquatic center, and yet the revenues, we don't generate the same revenues from those areas as we do in cities. So it would be a benefit, I think, to everyone figure out what we can do about those areas. That's just one example of a topic that we came up with. It may not be your favorite, it may not be one that you want to spend a lot of time on, but that's what we want to talk to you about.
Sounds like our opportunity to answer Jeff's question is tonight, right? Talk through it a little bit. Go ahead, Eric.
I would just, looking at some of the areas that were identified as being already an emphasis in the comprehensive plan, downtown and the waterfront being one of them, to me is pretty, is tied to future jobs, family wage jobs. And so on these focus areas, I think what Ali was kind of asking is, how much can we tie into some of the existing language that's in the comprehensive plan, like with downtown and waterfront, and how much interface can we have between those topics? If you say, a focus area would be family wage jobs, but we want to talk about how those interact with downtown and future waterfront development over the next 20 years.
We can certainly frame it that way, yeah.
We could hit that as we go through the different chapters on the topic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what we do is pull out in the existing plan everything that deals with downtown and waterfront, whether it's jobs or whatever the subject might be. Pull everything out that's specific to those areas, and then take a broad look at it, make sure it's still the direction that we want to go. Again, barriers, what's working, what's not working, in terms of our policy base and the direction that we're provided in the comprehensive plan. That would be the way that we see it, the best use of all of our time, I think.
So, Phyllis?
I'd like to reiterate what Jeff was saying. I would really like to know some of the things that were thought to be good ideas whenever the last review happened to be, and what didn't turn out according to plan. And actually, for me, that would be a starting point. I don't know if you're prepared to discuss some of those this evening or not, but some of these others, too, I look at as we're not going to be affecting them directly. We're going to be affecting them indirectly, like family wage jobs and economic growth. You don't affect those things other than kind of through the back door. You have to set up the environment for that to be happening. And so we need to talk about the infrastructure on that. So I'd love to hear what we thought numbers of years ago that didn't work. And I'm hearing that some of the urban villages are somewhat of a disappointment. And maybe their time just isn't here yet. I don't know. Fairhaven sort of leapt off the page, but some of the others I know are a little slow in coming, but maybe there's good reason for that.
Well, and we're working on some incentives, a package of incentives that we can talk to you about as well that might help jumpstart things in some of those areas that haven't seen a lot of development.
I have a quick suggestion before we continue. I'd like to ask the members of the audience how many people are intending to speak on this topic. Julie, I know you want to. That's part of this. Yeah. And can you raise your hands if you intend to speak? Okay, so two. Can we just take these two speakers now? Is that okay? And that way, if they have something that might inform our decision-making process on which focus areas we choose, we've heard them. And we could have a long discussion, and I feel bad making them wait all night. So if that's okay with everybody, I'd like to allow public comment at this time on this topic for the work session. And so, Julie, if you want to come up and speak, do that now. And we give you 3 minutes here.
Thank you very much for your consideration. That's helpful. Carol Dukes is part of the Cordata Neighborhood Association, and I'm president. And we are very, very interested in seeing a library in the North End. And that's the information and the suggested wording that we gave to each of you this evening. We have been conferring with the library board for maybe 10 years. And at first it was, there will never be another branch. We don't need branches. Now there's a consideration about maybe, and then when there's discussion about budget. So we felt it was extremely important that it get into the comprehensive plan as a goal, so that there would be, if it's in the comprehensive plan, then there can be ways to work it out over time. So that's basically my message to you all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carol Dukes, and I reside at 4575 El Dorado Way in the Cordata neighborhood. I relocated to Bellingham to be with family and to enjoy the quality of life that you have to offer. The natural beauty that surrounds us, art and music, hiking trails, are just amazing. Thank you for making the Cordata Trail a reality, and we are looking forward to the Meadowland Park in the future for our neighborhood as well. I'm here tonight to support the idea of a Cordata neighborhood library that could offer expanded services to learners of all ages. Our neighborhood is expanding quickly as more families move to this area, seeking affordable housing and more accessible community and educational services. Of special interest to me is being able to offer through neighborhood library a safe learning environment that encourages children to read and learn about the world they live in and explore their role in making it work better. Storytime sessions for tots, after-school support for teenagers, intergenerational programming. We need to be the village with a library for our children. I hope that you will continue to consider and work toward implementing just such a special place for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll close the public comment period on this topic and then get back into our discussion. Steve, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah,
go ahead.
If I can make a quick comment on the library issue. Page 53 of the comp plan, it states that the primary focus of our library will be to remove it, find another location, and rebuild it. I believe that thinking now is out, and that they have gone to the thought that we're going to work with what we have. It's too expensive to relocate. And I think that that initial paragraph in the comp plan should be looked at and redone. Thank you.
Yeah, it needs to be updated.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so back to discussion. Phyllis, you just offered up some thoughts, and
I was just tossing those out as thoughts, but I'd love to hear from staff as to just kind of a, even off the cuff, what things may not have gone as anticipated, so we can see how we might approach this next phase.
Greg, do you feel like you could run through that, or is there a better way for us to broach that topic?
I think we would like to have some time to think about that, and
I mean, maybe I'm just thinking about how we structure this discussion. Maybe we should run through these ideas and any other topics that planning commissioners might have, and then maybe we could talk about how effective we've been on these topics as we go through them.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Because I think it's a really important question that's raised, and maybe it's just a part of each of these. So, if we get into one of these, Greg and Lisa and you guys have feedback on that element, you can help us. Does everybody feel okay kind of? We could either go through these, or we can have kind of like a broad discussion that could end up all over the board in terms about what's important. And if there's specific things that are important that aren't on this list, I think we should go through them and discuss them if a planning commissioner wants to bring them up. But probably easiest to just start and go down the line.
And we're not limited to these. I mean, if there's other topics or
Not at all.
other things
Yeah.
that are missing here, this is have to be the framework for our discussion. So
We could pick none of these if we want.
I think there's some good. I think there's some good focus areas here,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be this isn't our only list. So if
Yeah.
things come up in our discussion, we can.
Without a doubt.
Staff's list was much longer than this. These were the highest vote getters, but there was quite a list that we came up with. So
I'd say do it. Let's
Okay, well,
start at the top.
Phyllis, do you want to start with the first one and talk about
Well,
it?
no, actually, I was going to add one.
Oh,
We've talked around what the downtown should look like, and in some discussion, it's been lumped in with the urban villages and having that kind of a look or that kind of guideline. And personally, I would like to see downtown stand alone and be the iconic area for all of Bellingham and not be restricted by so many of the things that are in the urban villages have a lot of restrictions and how they're going to look and so on. I would love to see our downtown open to creativity and iconic buildings, and right now there's no height restriction. I know there's a real temptation to put one in, but I'm not sure that that's the wisest thing to do. And I'd love to put our downtown in here, and we envision what our downtown is going to look like, which I do not see as an urban village, and I think it would be an unfortunate move to lump that together with the other satellite areas.
Yeah, that's a good topic, and I think when we pull out the sections of the plan that deal with downtown, you'll see that it has a special focus. While it's listed with the urban villages, it's really listed as the most important urban village, and there's a whole lot of stuff in the plan about downtown. We can go through that and make sure that that is still the direction that we want to go. There's probably as much time spent on downtown in the plan as any single subject. And so that probably should have been on the list.
Oh, a quick question.
Garrett? Yeah.
How up to date is our comprehensive plan on the waterfront? Seeing that we've gone through so many, policy changes over the last just couple years.
Yeah, I think with the waterfront, we can probably eliminate a whole bunch of stuff that's in there because there was a lot of policy direction that came out of the Waterfront Futures Group, and some of that is still very relevant, but there is a plan that's been adopted for the waterfront now, and so there's probably some things in there that we could take out that have been accomplished or they're going to be accomplished. The vision for the waterfront is in there, and it's debatable whether the adopted plan follows that vision or not, but we can review that with you as well.
Just to clarify, we're on the focus areas. You had a list on the PowerPoint that covered a lot of topics like cleaning it up and streamlining it. Something like what you just talked about, there's irrelevant goals and policies now because we've adopted a waterfront plan, and the same is probably true to a certain degree from our downtown adoption. Mm-hmm. Is the expectation that you guys you guys being staff will kind of go through the whole comprehensive plan? Does that come back to us, or are we just going to assume that you guys are going to take care of that?
It's up to you. I mean, we can show you all of the changes, and you should be aware of all of the changes. But whether or not you want to spend time in a meeting going over them is up to you. We can provide you with, here's what the plan says about downtown now. Here's sort of what we're proposing it say, and you'll be able to compare the two. So you'll see all of the changes, but if you want to go through all of it, you can pick out anything that you think is important that you want to talk about. But I'm hoping that you can rely on us to do a lot of the administrative stuff that is cleanup or consolidation or whatever it might be, so that you don't have to spend time wordsmithing things.
Okay, I mean that makes sense to me. Steve?
I'm getting kind of confused here. In the paragraph relating to to these focus areas, it says, while the policy foundation will not change with the update process. Well, we just talked about changing the policy foundation. So
yeah,
are we free to break out? It says downtown and the waterfront, and downtown is comprised in a couple other those chapters. Is that what we're going to do? Can we pull out downtown, pull it out of this and the waterfront, and address that by itself?
You can. Yes.
Okay.
If that's what you choose to do, you can, absolutely.
If I could speak on that.
Sure.
kind of where Steve's going. I think if you're looking at, the comprehensive plan as being the policy document where, for the future, whereas if there's a large project or a large proposal, say on the waterfront for, 50 acres of development, it has to go through all the legislative land use, all the process, and the part of the evaluation is going to be based on policy language in the comprehensive plan, right?
Well, if it's an area that's not covered by the existing adopted plan, I mean, we do have an adopted plan for the waterfront, so if a development comes in that's consistent with the plan, then, there's environmental review and building permit review and all of that, but if it's consistent with the zoning setup, if it's consistent with the plan that we have, then there wouldn't be necessarily a legislative process.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because it's not a rezone at that point. It's not a, it's
Right.
just, it's within that adopted,
Right.
land use.
And the downtown plan and the waterfront plan are effectively they're parts of our comprehensive plan. We voted on them in the past few years and adopted them into our
Yes.
comprehensive plan.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wonder personally about the downtown and waterfront if we just approved plans for those places that laid out exactly what we wanted, and those were supposed to be approved consistent with this document. So I'm not sure.
Sure.
I don't know. For me, it's like it's not areas, it's bigger ideas, and then as we discuss those ideas, they're going to roll over the top of the downtown, and we're going to talk about those big ideas in the context of downtown. Like, I like what you're saying about downtown should be our focus, but should we be picking economic, environmental, and social health? Because as we talk about creating economic health, we can talk about how do we make downtown this vibrant, unique place. See what I'm saying? It's almost like the opposite idea, and that's really hard. I'm having a hard time getting my head around it, but that's kind of where I'm going with this, as opposed to saying let's focus on downtown or the waterfront specifically. Jeff?
Oh, excuse me. Well, that actually, I had two things that I would want to add to the list, and that actually gets to one of them. And the one issue that I grapple with, again, looking at it from the top level, as if you're up in the sky, is that the way the last comp plan was structured, which I'm not sure I agree with, is it folded neighborhood plans and urban village plans into an overall structure, as opposed to planning for the city, period. You're planning for the city, balancing, the objectives of this neighborhood versus the citywide interest for transportation, for funding, for everything else. And years ago, the city seems to have made a decision that basically the comp plan was going to be the sort of matrix that neighborhood plans would fold into and just automatically be part of. And it maybe or may not be worth revisiting whether that's actually the best thing to do. I mean, that's one of those things where you look at the outcomes and you scratch your head a little bit about, was that really the best thing to do? Is it better to have a comp plan that looks at the overall macro health of the city and the macro health of housing and everything else, and plan from that perspective rather than neighborhood perspective? So that ties into waterfront and downtown too, because again, we're talking about, well, here's one neighborhood, here's one urban village, here's the downtown, here's this neighborhood, and there are all these separate fragmented pieces, and then this other comp plan that we're working on is going to just overlay it or underlay it.
Is that a suggestion that we should add the neighborhood plans as a focus area? Possibly?
I think it's worth a conversation, because that's one of those things where you're trying to figure out how to do a comp plan, and I know there's not interest in tackling a whole lot of work on this and reinventing the wheel, but on the other hand, if we look back at how we got to where we are today, and since the last comp plan, that might be an interesting conversation.
Where do they fit in?
Well, the neighborhood plans are a part of the comp plan, and they've been that way ever since we've had these neighborhood plans. And we've talked about over the years the pros and cons of that, and we can have that discussion. Some communities, sub-area plans like our neighborhood plans are part of their comprehensive plan. I would say most of the time they're not. And we can have a discussion about the pros and cons of the way we're set up, if you want to do that.
Is this starting to get to rewriting the entire comprehensive plan then?
No, I don't think so, but this is a structural issue more than anything else, and you know, we can have that. We can certainly have that discussion. There are pros and cons for having those neighborhood plans be part of the comprehensive plan. There's some good things about it, and there are some things that make it very difficult for us to administer. So we'd be happy to have that discussion if you'd like to do it.
Steve?
If it was not included within the comp plan, the neighborhood plan, then what power would that neighborhood plan carry as far as infill, suggestions, transportation? It would be a document outside of the comp plan. So how would it, what weight would it carry?
Well, I hesitate to have this discussion now, but since we're having it, the neighborhood plans are primarily policy documents, and there are sections of them that suggest infrastructure improvements. For example, we need a sidewalk on West Maplewood or whatever it might be. They don't really have any power. The regulatory structure is in the zoning code. The regulations are in the municipal code. The neighborhood plans themselves don't have any regulatory authority. They are more like policy documents. This is what we see for the future of our neighborhood. So in terms of their impact, I'm not sure that whether they're part of the comp plan or not is a big deal, is a major change. It's more of perhaps more of a perception issue that because they're part of the comp plan, they do have some more weight. They carry more weight than they would if they aren't. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think that is the perception. And so that's part of the pros and cons discussion that we could have. But they're not regulatory. They're policy documents.
We've seen over the past few years that the one thing about a neighborhood plan emphasizes the character of a neighborhood. And we see that thrown back, good or bad. Mm-hmm. We've seen it come back at either city council or at us. This particular project would ruin the character of the neighborhood. So if that was outside the comp plan, it's just an advisory as to policy, then that we would like to see our neighborhood keep its character within the neighborhood bounds.
Yeah, that's a great example, because statements in the neighborhood plan that say preserve neighborhood character are just they're policy statements. They don't have any regulatory authority. So when it comes to a new development, if we're talking about character of development, we have design guidelines that can impact the way a structure looks, the way a building looks, that may do more to address character than a statement in the neighborhood plan about protecting neighborhood character. So again, policy statements, whether or not they're part of the comp plan, they don't really have any regulatory authority, but there is that perception that they carry more weight because they are part of the comp plan. So there's the actual impacts of separating from the comp plan, and then the perceived impacts, and that would be an interesting discussion to have with the community.
Garrett?
Well, but if you're looking at criteria and you're trying to establish consistency with the comprehensive plan, is the rezone consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan? In that regard, the neighborhood goals and policies really are guiding some of that process. I mean,
that's true.
They
that's
are
true.
part of that comp plan.
That's a good point.
So that might not be a bad discussion to have just on how that's structured, because it does, we've seen a lot of impact on how those have affected certain land use proposals or certainly comprehensive plan amendments. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying it may be may be something that could be beneficial to look at.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, just to follow the whole thought up, is I just think it's worth looking at whether there's been an issue of balkanization, and also whether the neighborhood plans sometimes internally conflict with overall objectives of the comp plan. Mm-hmm. And there's this other layer of confusion, and you may have some people in the neighborhood that think it's essentially a CC&Rs that they have in this document, that nobody's going to do anything else, and then hearing you is sort of doesn't really have standing, but it's a policy document. I think we could clarify this one way or another through this comp plan process so people really understand what it is and what it isn't, and what we're really trying to plan for the whole city.
We have a topic that says balancing environmental protection with density and economic development. You could almost substitute the words environmental protection for neighborhood character. Balancing neighborhood character with density and economic development. I mean, that's like what we're talking about, is how these neighborhood plans and the policy statements that are in them might not jive with other policy statements in the comprehensive plan and how it all comes together. I'm not suggesting that's a focus area. I'm just saying I think you're right in terms of this is the interface between the plans and the broader comp plan policies sometimes doesn't fit nicely.
Well, I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this. I was mostly trying to identify it as a potential topic that somehow hits within the framework, because again, it's one of those structural issues that I was concerned with. I do have one other that I can either talk about now, or if we've beat that one to death, or if you want to keep talking.
Let's do this. Let's go back to the idea that we started with, which is going through these, and then maybe when we're done, or if your other idea fits in a point, we get to it.
Whole new idea.
It's a whole new idea. Let's go through these first.
We need more coffee stands.
And because I think we could be here all night talking about, these are pretty complex topics. I mean, let's just use one as an example. The first one on our list on the paper printout was implementation of the existing urban village plans. So as a focus area. And I'd like to see if anyone has any thoughts on that topic. We could maybe work through those thoughts, and then maybe those tie into other thoughts on other topics, but it's a good starting point. Phyllis?
Well, I was just going to say that, getting back to what I'd mentioned before and what you mentioned and also what Jeff had said, and the reason I brought up downtown was so many things I think that are going to happen, as we've discovered in planning, is a secondary product of the decision. We may not recognize what the effect is going to be of our decision at the moment, and I just want to be aware of some of these things and how they're being affected, and that's why I wanted to throw downtown in there. But I'm not just defending that position, but I think so many of these things are going to be met indirectly, and we need to figure out, so if we try to meet them directly, I don't know how we go about doing some of that. We can try.
Hopefully we'll be able to hit them as we roll through the chapters on a topic, but again, I don't think, like Garrett said, we're not stuck with this list, and probably once we choose the list, we can choose to talk about other things later too. But this urban village plan item is a good first one because it's kind of covers everything. I mean, it's an item where the city has had some success and some failure, right? And it was a keystone element when you read the comprehensive plan of this 2006 update. So it was basically picked as like the most important thing for us to work on, and now we've had some success and some failure. So maybe I could start with a question, which is, does staff feel like there were problems with what the comprehensive plan put together in 2006 for urban village implementation?
No, I think we were thinking of it in a little different way. The comprehensive plan talks about 20-some urban villages. I mean, there are a lot of them. And as we've done the planning work for the 5 or whatever it is that we've done, we recognize that, there's a limited market for housing in urban villages and commercial in urban villages, and in many cases they are areas that are already developed, and so redevelopment is the way an urban village is going to happen. And so I think the way we're thinking of it is to reduce the number maybe and focus on the ones that truly have an opportunity to develop in the next 20 years and what needs to happen in order for that to occur. And like I said, there's this other side discussion that's going on about incentives that we need to incorporate into the plan, talking about impact fees and system demand charges, and can we defer those things, or can we waive them in certain circumstances to encourage development in urban villages. So there's this whole other discussion going on, but the way we were thinking about it was looking at first the number. Is it really realistic that we're going to have 20 of these things in the next 20 years? Probably not. what are the resources that the city has to encourage these things to occur? Where can we invest in infrastructure that'll make the most difference? What incentives can we put in place to sort of help jumpstart things? I don't look at for example, the Old Town Urban Village Plan as a failure necessarily. It just hasn't happened yet. The time isn't right. We need to understand why, and we think we do, but we want to go through that, and then what do we do about that? So that's kind of the way we were thinking of it. Again, looking at barriers, looking at the ones that have been successful, looking and really focusing on the 5 or 6 that are most likely to occur, and focus our resources there, because obviously we can't build roads or sidewalks or those things in 20 different urban villages. We just don't have the resources to do that. So where can we make the most difference?
Let's go with Jeff and then Garrett.
Well, we just got to my issue, so
All right.
I'll segue right into it. So you bring up an interesting point. So my issue that I wanted to get to was looking at financing infrastructure and the best ways to do it. And one of the issues that I've observed over the years is that permit fees, impact fees, everything keep ratcheting up, increasing the cost per unit of development. And then the council has tended to then try to counter that with fee waiving, reductions, whatever else. And there's this ongoing game of how do you get development channeled into these areas. And urban villages are a perfect example. That's exactly where it is when you look at interest rates where they are right now, and you look at demand where there is right now, and building's not happening, you've got to start wondering why. And when people I've asked about it have basically said, the permitting and the impact fee costs drive the things over the edge, so when they're trying to balance how to develop in the market, it doesn't pencil out. It's not that necessarily there's no demand for that particular housing. There's not necessarily, and when interest rates go up, you get a prime rate at 8%, things are not going to be any better. They're going to be way worse. So I think the whole money issue on how you fund infrastructure and whether the impact fees are at appropriate levels and whether that's the way to do it, and whether credits and incentives to offset those that are available only in certain areas, only to certain people for certain things is the way to do it. I think all that's a really important thing to talk about in the comp plan, because for me, in the ideal world, you'd have moderate development costs and maximum choice in putting housing in the market, and you'd have a natural growth in urban villages. But that hasn't happened, so it makes me wonder why.
Garrett?
Well, I think there's a good point. I think as far as financing infrastructure, I think one of the last things we want is the city trying to pick and choose where infrastructure should go. I think the market should determine that. But one of the big things that could be a boom to some of these urban villages would be incentives. I mean, we've seen what it did downtown when they did the property tax hold for whatever it was 10 years, and you saw how many apartments and multifamily started going in downtown. That's a huge tool. So I mean, urban villages, I think, absolutely needs to be on our focus area discussion. I mean, I think I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that, but seeing it was such a big focus in the 2006 comp plan, it's not a matter of, did it work or not? It's a continuation of those goals. I think limiting the number of urban villages is key, and focusing and trying to be more effective on developing the areas that have real potential. One point you brought up was that a lot of these areas are already developed. So by not having, 15 or 20 of them, it doesn't mean in the future, should these 5 or 6 fully develop, you can't extend beyond that and start looking, because we're mostly talking about redevelopment, not greenfield development. But incentives, I think, would be and those would all be things you talk about, but I think they should be a focus area for sure.
Well, I agree. I feel like the infill section of our land use chapter and the urban village sections are pretty robust. There's a lot of goals, and there are a lot of goals and policies that I don't look at and say this needs to change. I look at them and say we have the language, and the implementation is what has failed. And so for me, I completely agree with the topics that you just raised and also you. And the one thing I wrote down of my own idea was level of service. And then I started thinking about level of service, and level of service isn't a focus area. It fits into this discussion about these items. And so I kind of feel like we have a good base, and to do the things that Greg has talked about, and to address infrastructure cost and impact fees and level of service and incentives, for me, that all falls under housing choice and affordability focus area. And so for me, I really think that that's like the most important one, because if we make housing choice and affordability, I know I'm jumping down two on the list, but the things that matter to me about implementing our existing urban village plans, we can address through discussion of housing choice and affordability. You know, housing choice and affordability allows us to discuss level of service issues, incentive issues, reducing the number of urban villages, those kinds of things. So I'm just trying to think about how to narrow this list down and still capture all the things I want to talk about. And I feel like for me, urban villages are important, but we could stuff the important things within that topic into another topic. Jeff, does that make any sense?
Well, it does make sense. It actually makes too much sense, because when I looked at the list, that was the one thing that interested me most.
Housing choice and affordability.
Housing choice, affordability, and urban villages. So all of a sudden you have one big topic, and almost everything else just seems like noise to me, but I shouldn't say that.
Well, it's true. No, urban villages are a part of our housing choice and affordability
Right, it's the core of the whole comp plan.
So, yeah, I mean, I would hate to see us spend a ton of time hashing through all the goals and policies on urban villages, knowing that a lot of them are good and there, and try and use one of the other topics to catch those issues that do matter to us. Just my opinion, thoughts on what you guys, mostly based on what the two of you have just said.
I think that when you get sort of the summary of what's in the existing plan, dealing with urban villages, and we go through that, and you're going to say, yeah, this is still the direction we want to go. This sets the policy framework. Again, we probably would focus on implementation. You know, what can we do? We've got the goals. We know what the goals are. We know what the policies are. Sort of get it. The how do we get there? The implementation part is probably where we want to focus. And I think the same is true for downtown. When you look at what's in the plan with regard to downtown, the goals, the policies are pretty robust. It's what's the next step? What can we do? How do we implement these policies? What do we do? What are we not doing that we should be doing? What are we doing that we shouldn't be doing? What are the barriers? That's the discussion that I envision us having with those topics in particular.
Just to get as an example, extrapolating that out, if we chose something like housing choice and affordability, and we're working through and we get to the land use chapter in our little progression, we can start talking about how changes to the urban village sections of the land use chapter impact housing choice and affordability, right? That's
well,
how we
you've
can,
got, yeah, and you've
then
got,
when we get to another chapter, we can talk about, when we get to parks, we can talk about how level of service impacts the cost of housing and housing choice and affordability. So I mean, that's kind of how I'm seeing this kind of starting to line up. I don't know, Phyllis?
Well, I think then of that list, the other leg of the stool would be balancing economic protection and density and economic development. If you put that in with housing choices and affordability and urban plans, somehow it would be affecting just about everything else. Those three.
What was the third?
Balancing economic protection or environmental protection with density and economic development.
I just think, I think you could take any one of these issues and you could really sort of broaden and expand them into the discussion that you want to have. I'm just trying to think of a way that if we're going to be trying to ask staff to come back with, some focus areas, how we do that and identify, three maybe key, key items. I think we would really be limited, we wouldn't be giving very good direction if we just said, hey, housing choices and affordability, even though that you could split off that into a lot of different ways. I don't know, is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting we pick more than one, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Pick a bunch, but I think once we pick them, they're going to run us through every single chapter on that topic.
and see how it relates to the
And we can
existing
talk about
plan.
how it relates to, each chapter of the plan, downtown, the waterfront, land use, parks.
Okay, I see where you're going. Because you're saying that, what you're saying is the goals and policies for, urban villages are pretty robust.
Specifically, yeah.
Just did downtown and waterfront, that's new.
Yeah.
So that's well vetted, that's pretty current.
And if we need to make minor changes, we can do it in that context. But I'm not saying that's the only answer.
No, yeah.
For me, when I look at the community, I think housing affordability is a really important issue. I think the other really important issue is generating family wage jobs. I mean, we're student population, retirement population, not a lot of jobs for people in the middle of their lives, and that to me is a huge topic. I mean, when I start looking at the big picture issues and then how these all play in, and maybe for like the new economy for me is a focus area. When we're talking about how to create family wage jobs, we can talk about how we support new economies that might contribute to more family wage jobs. So when you look at the big topics, those two particularly for me personally, I don't know. Maybe we should have everyone go through and pick their top three.
I was just going to suggest that I'd mark down 4 that I would have as my top priorities.
We would like to hear those.
You would, huh?
Yes.
Number 1 is balancing the environmental protection with density and economic development. Number 2 is housing choices and affordability. Number 3 would be the urban villages, and number 4, the urban growth areas.
Oh.
That's basically what I was saying before, because everything else ties into those limited choices. And if you get into new economy and family wage jobs, those are a byproduct of other decisions made. You're not going to approach those directly.
Well, we have we have an economic development chapter. Is that the chapter where we would try and tackle something like that? Mm-hmm. But you're right. That topic is pretty broad.
And, these things all overlap, and we're not trying to limit you in any way. We're just trying to find a way to organize the review of the document that will work for you, that will work for us. And that's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to limit you just to any certain topic, or if it's family wage jobs, well, we can't talk about how that is impacted by land use, or we can do that. We're just trying to organize things a little bit for you so that we can work our way through this in a relatively short time frame.
Well,
Garrett?
okay, my thoughts are, looking from a big picture, the two things that in our community that I think need to be addressed, from a policy standpoint, jobs is a big one. When we were doing the growth forecast, I spent some time on the OFM website, and I was pretty surprised at some of the numbers that I started seeing about wages in Whatcom County and Bellingham, and how effective we can be in a comp plan to address some of those things, that may be limited, but I definitely think it warrants discussion. And that ties into housing affordability too. Our housing prices are high in relationship to our wages, disproportionately high. Those are real facts. I mean, there's no getting around that. So I think those two things definitely, would be, talked about. And then from a planning commissioner standpoint, the things about balancing environmental protection with density and economic development, I think that's, that's kind of the crux of it. I mean, half the land use proposals that come here, people cherry pick language out of the comprehensive plan to support their policy or support their position, and then you're trying to make a decision based on conflicting goals within the policy. So maybe some better clarification on what we're doing moving forward might be helpful.
That's why you get the big money sitting here.
That's right, yeah. So those would be my 3 things, I guess, if I had to just pick 3, and I think other things could tie off of that.
Jeff, you had a comment?
So I wasn't going to give my 3 until it's my turn, but I was going to point out a couple things. One is that, the terminology of balancing environmental protection with density or economic development implies that there are trade-offs between them, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. And actually, I don't even like that bullet, because I think the health, environmental health, economic health, and social health incorporate that entire discussion. And I'll give you an example. In those areas, if one were to sit back and actually look at, okay, what does environmental health actually mean? You might very well find that it makes more sense to focus on riparian corridors and habitat areas, and you might come up with a different direction than you would have, like, oh, well, this development wants to come in here, we're going to have to clear this many trees, and that's the environmental versus development trade-off. So I almost think that the health incorporates that second bullet fairly well, depending on how it's interpreted, and it doesn't come up with this false idea that there's a trade-off there. Just my opinion. But the other thing I wanted to mention about family wage jobs, we tried that and got steamrollered. I don't know if everybody remembers the waterfront plan, but I was very aggressive in trying to retain a marine trades area in the waterfront that's already there. A lot of high-paying jobs that are there. Went to council, got steamrollered by the port, and that got stripped out so we could have more baristas and, whatever. So there's a certain degree of futility, I think, in land use planning to try to even get too far into the weeds on that, because ultimately the jobs are there or they're not. And I don't know how much say we actually have, and if we do try to wrap our heads around how you would drive family wage jobs through a land use plan and actually see it come to fruition, I can't connect all those pieces. So I just want to make that comment too. I'll get to my three later, but I just, based on what's happened to us in the past, I just feel like there could be some wasted breath and words that wouldn't necessarily really make it into something by the time we're all done.
I'll get a question on that. I mean,
Sure.
I'm just wondering, because I remember having that discussion, with the marine trades, and I supported, a robust marine trades area too. And I'm just wondering if in the comp plan there was a little more, stronger language to support, job creation or family wage jobs, if that could have had a little more traction as it, moved forward.
I don't know. That was a interesting test case, as the port is an economic development agency that's concerned with family wage jobs. But I'll leave it at that. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
It's a good question. I mean, if the more language there is in a comp plan that supports a specific, the harder it is for, at the council level and at the community level, to say no. They look, you get more egg on your face if you're going in direct contradiction. So it's a good point. If I could just say something about the balance, I think that topic is an important discussion topic. I completely agree with what you said about the way that is framed, because I think too many people in our community frame environmental protection and economic development and growth as these like mutually exclusive things that can't work together. And then that presentation, people use that to create conflict and make you choose one or the other. And I personally believe that they are not mutually exclusive, and that a lot of the time, you can benefit one with protecting the other, or protecting the environment by being smart about economic development. So I completely agree with that, and I don't like the way that's presented. And I also completely agree that health is the way to capture that discussion, and it's a much more positive term to go from. And Greg also said that particularly on social health and things like that, we don't have a lot of language. So, there's an item that we don't have a lot in the comp plan on, and it might be a good topic. And I agree, Jeff, it's a great way to cover that without, presenting it immediately as this, as two, diametrically opposed ideas or something, or that there's trade-offs. So for me, going down the line, I think that housing choice and affordability, and the top two on my list were that and health. Both are all environmental, economic, and social. And then I don't know if I have a third, because I feel like the comments on family wage jobs that you made, Phyllis, are true, that when we start talking about these other things and we start promoting changes in the health of our community and promoting housing choice and affordability, that's going to lead ultimately to a better job base. So for me, I really only have two right out the gates.
Okay, I have a question on that. You're talking about kind of that perceived conflict between, environmental protection and economic development, what would be a focus area that we could suggest that would give the comp plan more tools to sort of diffuse that, I guess?
Well, as we talk about health, if we're talking about our community's environmental health and economic health under the same focus topic, then in theory we could say, okay, well, where do we need to make policy changes to make it clear, what's important to us and where we focus our attention. I think that's kind of what, Jeff, you were talking about, right? Like, do we pick, certain areas of the environment are more important?
Well, the way I was looking at it was, so if you look at health as just that word, environmental health would be actually looking at to what degree ecosystems are intact and how they can be enhanced and what's important and what's not important. Economic health is having jobs available at all economic levels and working on job creation and looking at taxes and how efficient our infrastructure is for attracting businesses. Social health, housing affordability even comes into that, although I won't confuse that. But it's, like, what do you do with homeless? What do you do with keeping the downtown core safe, the whole downtown streets initiative? So I could see that capturing a lot of the health of a lot of these different areas in one item that then we can go through and compare that with the other chapters as we go through.
Also, I agree. Also, affordability. When you start talking about housing affordability, you start talking about, like what we're talking about with subdivision ordinance and trying to make more efficient use of land. But I hate to use the term because I just said I don't like it, but balancing these things.
Well, I guess my question is, like, if you already have a environmental chapter in the comp plan and you have an economic development chapter, so you already have those two chapters, and I think those are what, we're seeing a lot of things get pulled from those when you're looking at land use, you already have those two chapters in place. So, I mean, we're not talking about eliminating chapters. We're talking about, how do we, there's still going to be that inherent conflict. And so do you kind of focus on health to use that to sort of go over the top of those? Or?
Well, I think the mechanics of how that's integrated in the comp plan would get worked out by staff, but I would point out that those chapters are sort of written somewhat in isolation to match the current comp plan, not written to match the objectives that we come up with in this revision. And so I think you guys can meld that in a format that would make sense. And I wouldn't assume that the environment chapter or economic chapter would be exactly the same in the forthcoming document set, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we would.
Speaking for the staff.
We would make, if you're talking about the health of the environment and the economy and social health, and we're going to go through every chapter. So when we get to the environment chapter, we're not only going to be talking about environmental health, we're going to be talking about the health of our economy and our society, our social health in the context of the environment chapter, and the same is true in the context of the economics chapter, and that would give us the opportunity to discuss those, how those interface and maybe make them less contradictory, less isolated. I don't know.
Listening to the discussion, you could almost say that that health line, economic health, environmental health, and social health, would be the three organizing principles that everything would flow from.
Yeah.
That could be the big header, and then everything else falls in various categories below it.
Because you are using those to identify, what's working in the plan. So if we're going through chapter by chapter, those could be good guiding, principles.
Can you capture the residential element of housing choice and affordability within social health? Are we going too broad, staff? Because then we can still talk about everything with those three topics. In every chapter, we might as well go through every page.
But housing choices and affordability would be both economic and social.
Yeah.
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 Steve, Cerise, any thoughts on this?
Well, right now, I'm kind of sitting on two of them. The existing urban villages and everything that Greg brought up regarding those urban villages, too many of them. financing alternatives to get those things going, reduce them to a smaller size. And the other one I'm looking at is housing choices and affordability. It seems like all we ever talk about is affordable housing. Isn't there another side of this issue that we should be looking at higher-end housing and exclusive housing? Because if all we do, and it seems like all we're worried about, is the affordable level. Now, there was some excellent diagnosis on what affordable housing is. It was done by, I believe, Darcy Jones in one of his submissions. And he came up, affordable housing is, for the average wage earner in this area, $60,000. They can't afford what the market is giving out for, say, a $200,000, $225,000 house. Well, that's fine, but what's going to happen? We do get higher income people into the town. Is there any consideration for this? And this is, I think it kind of ties into the new economy. And when I see a new economy, I see a broad new base of industry coming into this area. I would hope, I would certainly hope, whether it probably be in the county, but you're going to get residents in the city. And I just think sometimes we're just too politically correct to say, well, we got to worry about this, we got to worry about that. All we're going to have is every new house built in the city is going to be a $225,000 home. And I do believe that a certain percentage of every project should be affordable. I don't have any problem with that. But it just seems that we overdo and go over the line and worry about the affordability factor when there are other housing choices out there. And ask any realtor, do houses in Edgemoor sell or do they not sell? And how about having another area that we can look at to develop some property taxes out of this thing? So I look at it as sometimes we're just too focused on one particular area, and we've got to be balanced in everything that we're doing, in my estimation. And this housing choices and affordability, really, really important in that when you look at certain areas in this city, and I will refer to it often, is the Cordata area, in that you have duplexes, you have some triplexes, you have some single-family homes in very small lots. Mm-hmm. They range anywhere from 200,000 up to 420, and people are buying them. They're selling across the page. So I think we got to keep in mind the balanced approach in this housing thing, and don't get carried away either one side or the other. And that's my thought about the new economy. I would certainly hope that at some point in time we can get some new employers that come into this city. That's another reason I would really like to see the Kelly Klein annexed area. That's all light industrial. Everybody wants light industrial, that whole corridor there. And hopefully we get some companies that'll come in, and the family wage thing will take care of itself. I mean, how many, like you said, baristas do we really need in the city? How many corner coffee shops do we really need? How many banks? Banks don't give us any sales tax revenue. Look at the banks around. So I don't want to get caught in this development thing that we don't strive for something new, a new economy, and that's the way I see it written. So those are my two.
Thank you. Cerise?
Yeah, I'm appreciating the conversation, and I'm taking it all in and sort of processing it. And it seems to me that, pick 3 to 5, maybe pick all 6, maybe, maybe we're overthinking this a tiny bit, but I know it's a conversation and we have to flesh it out and sort of discuss all the ins and outs. But I feel like everything on this list is helpful and important. And if we did do something like, health as an overarching with the different categories of the economics and the environment and social health, that it does sort of touch on all of the other topics that we're looking at. Obviously, it's important for balance, but everything's sort of so interrelated that if we take just a few things as our focus, I think that we'll accomplish what we all want to accomplish. As far as I feel like maybe what's missing or something to add to the conversation is smart growth, smart planning, creative growth, not just maybe new economy, but new planning, new ways of doing things. So kind of stepping out of the box or finding a circle that we're going to work with, or just a new perspective of how to do things, I feel like is part of what is needed to kind of shake it up. We have to look at what's worked in the past, because that's what we can use for good information to move forward in planning, and then also looking at what didn't work, but also just looking at what's a new way to do things. What's a different way to do things? Because I feel like that's maybe where we're at, just not a new economy, but things are changing in every way, right? And how do we want to be smart about our planning? So I guess I would like the conversation or the thought process to be healthy, smart planning, or healthy, creative planning, in a way that we open up opportunities to move forward with all of these important topics. And I think, we all care about all these topics, and I feel like we're going to be able to cover all of those. But that's just kind of that's what's going around in my brain right now. How do we accomplish moving forward, smartly, that affects the environment in a good way, that affects all, if we affect the environment in a good way in our health, we accomplish, I feel like, everything. We get good housing for all types. We find a balance. We we give incentives for new jobs, new housing types. So I guess I feel like we're there, and I appreciate trying to kind of figure out how we want to focus ourselves forward, because it is kind of a lot, but it doesn't have to be, I guess, in some ways too. So smart planning, I don't know why that just keeps coming up in my mind. Like, I think of a house. A smart house has good systems that are good for the environment and good for your pocketbook and good for your neighbor. And, when you do something right, it goes out like a ripple effect. So, if you have a rain garden, there's benefits for your neighborhood because it looks nice, but also doesn't wash it down to the drain and go out to the bay. Or, so I guess my mind is kind of trying to figure out how do we use that concept in this process. I don't know if I'm making sense. I hope I'm making sense.
So, Phyllis?
I think you're making total sense. The thing that I really like to see in here is the idea of smart and creativity, because I think we've had the model of not building anything different than your neighbor has down the way has been kind of our guiding principle for some time. And I think that we are at a point where we should break loose of that and move forward with some creative thinking and some things that we're not going to micromind now, but to open the door for that and not force people to fit into the same mold. I think we'll bring that out, and I'd love to see that in Bellingham.
So do we capture that under a topic like Heather's drafted? I mean, I think it's a really important topic that you brought up, and it's just like all these things, it kind of goes over a lot of them, but it's a good way to capture a goal, to guide discussion of all these issues.
Maybe under health. I mean, health could be good or bad health. How about smart health? How about creative health? How about, something, if we're going to use health if we all choose to use that as our overarching focus and we put everything underneath that, maybe creative smart health or something.
Or you could title that innovation. I mean, really, you could do health and innovation. I mean, those could be, mingled, but...
Greg, how do you how do you envision, once we choose focus areas, how do you envision us going through these 3 work sessions and discussing all the chapters? Are we, like, let's say we pick 3 different ones. Are we going to spend a work session on each one and try and run through all the chapters and talk about the concepts related to one, and then the next work session do the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a logical way to do it. I'm not sure that one work session, we get through whatever it is, housing affordability in one work session. But yeah, I think that's sort of what we envisioned, was we pick the topics and we just we pull everything out of the plan that deals with that topic and put it in front of you, and we start talking about, what's still relevant, what's not, what needs to be changed.
How many years do we have to do this?
Well, and that's why we want to sort of pick the most important topics. What are the challenges that we face? And we just, we have to keep in mind that this is a policy document. It doesn't have all the answers in it. It directs us to do things in the future. We don't have to figure out how to solve housing affordability in the comp plan. We have to make sure that we're clear on the goal and we're clear on the policies of what that means and how we might get there. But the mechanics of it can take place other places, and they do. And we have a housing levy, and we have a block grant program, and we have a number of things that we're working on, incentives, and we're deferring impact fees, and we've got all these things going on that deal with affordable housing that are not necessarily part of the comp plan, but they're accomplishing the goals and the policies that are in the comp plan. So I don't want you to feel like we have to solve this affordability issue for the next 20 years in this comp plan. No, we have to figure out what the goal is. We have to actually review the goals that we have and the policies that we have. Are those still the right ones? That's the charge. So don't get, because this can feel overwhelming very quickly.
Yeah,
right?
just real quick. Well, go ahead.
Well, just listening to our conversation, I think one of the word that keeps popping into my head is sustainability. As we look at all our policies, like an example would be, level of service for our parks. We have an adopted policy to have a park and a trail within a half a mile of, every neighborhood. So, with our, we're not expanding our city at a rapid rate. How much land's available? How much is suitable for park acquisition? How sustainable is that goal? Maybe the level of service when it comes to parks should be providing better transportation to our existing parks. So, adopting a level of service like that. I just see that in a lot of these categories, what we're talking about is, are our goals sustainable? Because we already have the goals and policies, but are they sustainable for the next 20, 30 years? And so that's the word.
It's a really good word.
That's the word
That's
that
a
just
good word
keeps,
choice.
if you were to go through and check each chapter and each policy against sustainability, you could encompass a lot of these topics that we've talked about, and really, I think you could do some good with, the entire plan by looking at it through that lens.
My biggest concern with this is that what Greg just said, we're not changing the whole thing. We have a lot of good stuff in our plan, and we're trying to go through and pick topics that focus us to carry us through, because like Tom said, we could be here forever trying to get into the details. And my concern with picking like a single overriding focus like health, even though it encompasses economic, social, and environmental, is that how do we structure that over 3 meetings? Basically, if we pick something like that includes everything, we might as well just go through the comp plan page by page, because it's too, for me, while it really encompasses everything, it's almost too broad. I do understand the desire from staff to try and focus us a little bit. I think sustainability is a great topic, because that's something specific that they can go through and look at all these chapters and I don't know. 20 minutes ago, I thought health was a great single focus area. After we've heard this discussion, I kind of feel like we should pick 3 others.
Okay. That's why we're having this discussion, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the goal. We should be having this broad discussion now, so we can try and not have a crazy, huge, broad discussion over the course of the next 3 meetings. Jeff?
So I wouldn't suggest that as a focus item. More, I guess I would envision more as an overall framework
Okay.
for a goal or maybe an objective, depending on which level you want to be at. But that was more of a framework for, like, I would see if I were writing the comp plan, you know, the major objective is have a healthy community that supports, you know, and then you move on. It's not really, it's not the same sort of animal as actually looking at affordable and housing choices, you know, things like that. That's something you can delve into and start to look for specific, you know, specific different tools that you could use to get where you want to go, whereas health is an overall, this is what we want to do as part of our comp plans. That's what I was envisioning. It's not spending a lot of time talking about what it means. It's just keeping it in the back of your head as you go through the comp plan.
Phyllis?
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff, and just that's the overarching concept, and then taking the idea of creative planning and putting that in as a parenthetical statement underneath the health, and as the process we're going to go through to get there. Those are not the subjects that we're talking about specifically. Those are the things we're keeping in the back of our mind that it fits, and then we talk about them. We pick out the items underneath that fit into those. And but those are the overarching concepts that we keep in mind while we're talking about it, not that we talk about them directly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm actually kind of confused with the nesting. as it's ended up trying to figure out what's a subcategory of something else, but I never got to saying what my choices would be, but I just have one. Because I can see a lot of the other ones would be part of that, and that's just the housing choices and affordability, and the urban villages is actually a sub-bullet under that. But I think a lot of the other things will flow out of that, because I'd point out that affordable housing doesn't mean just building houses for people. It means having multifamily housing that's in a price range that actually is available for the workforce in Bellingham. You know, people that make $30,000 a year or $20,000 a year, where are they going to live? And there's a crisis out there right now. So that's an example. It's not just what kind of owner-occupied equity houses are you going to build. So there's just a lot that goes into that topic, and I think that's where we are really currently in a crisis that needs to be fixed. And the other stuff, I won't say it's noise, but it is interesting, and it is stuff that we'll certainly hit on. But I think that from my perspective, my vote's got to go with that one.
So here's what I'm hearing. We can continue this discussion, but I think it's really important what you brought up about sustainability being a driving factor in our review process. And I think I would like to suggest that we choose health and sustainability as the overriding concept that drives the discussion. Basically what you just said, Jeff, but add the word "and" sustainability, because I think that captures the big picture. And then I think that we should pick two or three more refined topics to drive that discussion. And I think the first should be housing choice and affordability, because I think every single person that has spoken has had some comment about that. And I feel I would suggest that we have one of either the other one or one of three be something related to economic development, new economy, driving how we change our innovation, like Cerise said, you know, how we change our plans, or maybe not, for economic development and promoting economic growth in the community. And if I could think of a third one, it would be related to environmental protection and preservation. And maybe, it's just a suggestion, but maybe we say under the umbrella of health and sustainability, we look at housing choice and affordability as a topic, you know, innovation in economic development as a topic, and environmental protection's a very broad term, but something that focuses us on that topic as we carry through. That's my suggestion.
I think those are good.
Phyllis?
I would like to have a discussion around the concept of sustainability. Some people might see that as more of keeping things the same, which
I don't. if we keep it the same, it might not be sustainable.
Okay. Well,
You know,
I mean,
so-
for how long? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think that could drive, go
I have
ahead.
a suggestion. I mean, sustainability is a tricky term. I would probably just use a different term.
Yes.
Because in my mind, the way that I was taught, it's the triple bottom line. It is the environmental, the economic, and the social. It's not what Garrett said. So I would maybe, I mean, that kind of encompasses everything you were talking about, but it's not necessarily Garrett's definition.
Of,
I mean,
of sustainability?
Right, it's the triple bottom line. I think that's how a lot of people interpret it.
I think it has a word that a lot of people have different thoughts about what it means, that, and I think we do need to work on that.
Okay, well then maybe we just go back to the overriding concept of health. I don't know, Jeff?
Well, I like the word, but I think it should be defined up front in the plan to be specific about what we're talking about. Because a bunch of those college-educated folks have come up with that triple bottom line, but
Yeah.
no,
Well,
I had
no,
that too. But you know, it's interesting because I work in a field where that term's used a lot, and you know, the working definition I've always heard is you don't do anything that limits the decision choices of future generations. So, you know, there's a simple sentence, but you know, it's a nice term in that if it actually captures what we're trying to do, we can say this is what it means and this is where we want to go with it. You know, I'm fine with that.
Would we need to figure that out tonight?
No, I don't think so, but we do want to define it so that it's clear to
Yeah,
people.
no,
what
I think
we-
that's really important to define it because it does mean different things to different people.
It does.
And the triple bottom line is something that means to a lot of people, and then there's other people who are saying that even that now is an outdated approach to thinking, and I don't know a lot about that, but I just know that even that's debatable. So, Phyllis?
Well, what about if we didn't have it as a separate line, but put sustainable for the, and then economic, or environmental, economic, and social sustainable goals there? You know, just put it in the sentence, health is the main overview, and then sustainable, environmental, economic, and social goals. When you get your concept in there, but it doesn't, I think when it's a standalone like that, it gives a completely different sense, and I agree with, you know, sustainability depends on where you've studied on what that would come up with, but I definitely want to see creativity and planning as like a parenthetical statement underneath that, so that essence is not lost. But we could do sustainable in the sentence itself.
Yeah, I mean, to me, sustainability is evolving with changing circumstances, and as you evolve with those circumstances, you're keeping your goals in mind. You know, your overall goals are still intact, but you're evolving, and so I mean that's how I sort of think about sustainability. Like the parks example, those level of services really aren't sustainable going long term. I mean, you can't just keep building parks. The land and the entitlements aren't going to permit that. So maybe your goal is to allow people to have access to parks within 10 minutes. So how do you go about doing that? So to me, and we could throw whatever word we could come up with or define sustainability. I think it's a good term, but I do hear what you're saying about different people meaning different things to different people. So I think we would have to define that. I like where Ali was going with just picking a couple of these, focus areas and then having sort of a guiding principle to evaluate and really have the discussion. And housing choices and affordability for me, that was on my list. The new economy, I think, could be brought into economic innovation, for future. And I think, I'd be fine with those two things. And then looking at it from the health of our community, sustainability of our goals as sort of the guiding principles. I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, I guess if it means too many things to too many different people, it might be hard to define. So, can you go back to the, there you go. Does anybody have any other thoughts at the moment? Steve?
Yeah, I still agree with everybody on that balancing environmental protection thing. I think there's a better way of stating that, or including it in a subheading somewhere. It could fit in so many different places.
It's really a product of other...
It's either or, and that's what I don't like about that suggestion.
Can I ask a question to staff real quick about the one topic we haven't really talked about that Tom did bring up, which is planning for these difficult to annex areas? Is that something that you, staff, sees goals and policies for, that we need to add? Or is that, I mean, you're talking about, just in the Fan and Facts we just approved, there's a reference to like the annexation phasing plan being updated and implementation documents, and, you know, that if that moves forward, that recommendation moves forward, it may become a model for all of these areas.
Could be,
And
yes.
to me, those are more like implementation things. I think it's important, but I'm just wondering if it's something that we
Yeah, it's
put
probably,
into the comp plan. How does that happen?
well, there are quite a few goals and policies in the comp plan now that deal with annexation and growth and development in urban growth areas. I think it can be a fairly quick discussion. We just review what's there in light of what we've just done. So yeah, I think that could be a sort of a sub topic that we could get through rather quickly. And it doesn't sound like there's a lot of interest from the commission on spending a lot of time on that, so we'll keep that in mind.
Well, I am curious, so there are a couple aspects of that. One is the financial aspect, which when we're talking about financing infrastructure, there's that whole issue of who pays for infrastructure in highly expensive annexation areas. So that the finance, that can be addressed in the financing topic, but I seem to recall there was some issues with the policy about when you set a threshold to go forward and reevaluate whether the annexation area comes in, and then we kind of went around in circles a little bit, but ultimately that's just a council policy decision at the time somebody comes in with a application.
Correct. Yeah,
request.
The council has to find that it's in the best interest of the city, balancing all of the goals that we have and the costs and the benefits.
So what specific, so does that even require specific language in the comp plan
I think
if you do the financing elsewhere?
Yeah, I think we just want to review what's there now in light of what's happened over the last 10 years and what's remaining in our UGA. Just take a quick look at it. Is there something we need to change? Is there some policy language or some other language we need to add to the plan? Like I said, I think it could be a fairly quick discussion. It's something we do want to address, but we don't need to spend a lot of time on it necessarily.
I have a refined proposal.
What's the refined proposal?
Because I'm still a little confused about how we might incorporate the concept of sustainability, and maybe everyone's comfortable with that, but I still think we should have this health topic as an overriding concept, and even if it was health, environmental, economic, and social as the concept, and then maybe I think innovation is such an important concept. What if we had two topics, housing choice and affordability as one that carried us through, and innovation in planning and economic development? How do we, as a topic, it's how do we think, we're thinking about our planning concepts and our economic development concepts. Maybe they're not together, but maybe innovation and planning as a topic and innovation and economic development, because I'm trying to capture how we talk about how to promote new economy and job growth and economic growth and be on the cutting edge of it, because that's where we need to go probably.
If you adopted that, that's going to take care of the family way. It should
That's
take
right.
care
Yeah,
of it.
I don't think
it
that.
should take
I
care
think
of that.
Phyllis was right when she said family jobs come from the other decisions we make.
I actually have a question for staff. My understanding is the legislature directed economic development activities specifically to ports in the state of Washington. That was one of the, in addition to operating transportation facilities, economic development was actually supposed to be the port activity in cities and counties with ports. And so, I'm not saying it's not important at all, because I actually think it's incredibly important, but I'm wondering when there's planning involved at the local level for all the objectives and the goals that you come up with, what does the port do for a plan and for its actual activities for economic development versus what does the city do in terms of trying to control these things or trying to address this through a land use plan? because I'm genuinely curious, because, you know, I know that we all pay port taxes, and it's not just for infrastructure, it's for economic development, and they've got an economic development staff, and they presumably come up with a plan for, or something, some mechanism for deciding what activities to do or not do for the staff to focus on for economic development. What do we do?
Yeah,
And
I think
what do they do?
that's a good discussion that we could have. If you'll, I'm sure that you all remember the economic development chapter word for word, right? Exactly. We really tried to limit that to what the city's role in economic development was and the things that we could do. And so that's pretty clear and recent. In terms of what the port does, I think that could be a discussion that we could have just for your education, for your information, and for ours as well. That is their primary mission, is economic development. And they do a lot of activities in that regard, but they aren't necessarily common knowledge, all of them, I guess I would say. So, yeah, we could have that discussion and the distinction between the two entities, but what the city does and what the city can do is contained in that economic development chapter, and then our community development staff is working on an implementation strategy, so taking those goals and policies that we just adopted and coming up with an implementation plan to actually implement those goals and policies. And we could brief you on what that work looks like and how it's coming, because it's a work in progress, but there has been some progress, so we could spend a little time talking about that if you want.
Well, I don't want to waste everybody's time if not everybody's interested in that level of detail. I just, you know, when I look at the tools the city has a high B&O tax rate. You can play with that. You know, you have a lot of different designations that have different tax rates that could be played with. But I look at what tools the city really has for economic development other than tax rate and having adequate land available at the proper zoning.
Yeah.
What else do you do? So we can certainly do the zoning end of it in the land use plan, but I'm just, you know, I was curious how all the pieces fit together, and I don't need to waste everybody's time more than that.
If we were to eliminate the first topic and incorporate, that should be incorporated in, say, the balance of the other three, and we proceed to use those three. Now, it's my understanding we're going to take those topics and we're going to look at each and every one of the chapters. That's correct?
Yes.
How long, with all these chapters, do you see us covering all this in 2 more workshops?
It'll take as long as it takes. I think some topics will take longer than others. For instance, the housing affordability. So we'll focus on the land use chapter, the housing chapter, and probably the community design chapter. Those are the 3 chapters that have that primarily address housing choice and housing affordability. So it's not like you'd be looking at all 10 chapters for every topic. It's those 3 primarily for housing choice and housing affordability.
Then what will staff's responsibility be prior to a workshop? Will staff go through 3 or 4 of these items and try to apply these topics to that and pick out consistencies or inconsistencies and present them to us?
Right, so that's what we would do. If the topic is housing affordability, we would pull out from the land use chapter, from the housing chapter, and from the design chapter, those goals and policies that deal with that topic and go through them with you, and we can identify areas where we think the goals or the policies are outdated or conflicting or where there are gaps. That's sort of how we see it playing out. So we would provide you with that summary of, here's what the plan says about affordable housing, the land use chapter, the housing chapter. Here are the goals and policies that we currently have. Are they adequate? Are there gaps? Are there ones that we can take out? That's the way we see it going. If that will work for you guys, and let's try it. If it ends up we start with whichever one we start with, and it doesn't meet your needs, it doesn't go as well as we think it might, we'll go to Plan B.
Where does the question of the neighborhood comp plans come into this discussion?
We can have that discussion at any time. I mean, it's sort of it's a structural issue. It's not really it's not a GMA issue. It's not something that we have to address. It's a function of the way our plan is structured, and we could have that discussion at any point in time wherever we think it fits in. I'm not sure that it neatly fits into one of those categories, but we can put it on the list at some point and have that discussion.
During one of these workshops, you're
Yeah.
saying, or a later date?
Yeah.
Okay.
We want to get you through all of the topics that you want to get through.
So do you see most of our discussion being based on looking at the overall goals and objectives as you just described and the policy statements that are in the comp plan, or do we talk a little bit about implementation? Because I'm guessing a lot of the existing verbiage is not bad at all. It's quite good. But the issue has been what's happened with the implementation. And so does that mean that in the new comp plan there should be tighter language and more directive language that supports implementation in a certain direction to give you tools to say, yes, here's not only our goal and objective, but here's the actual concrete implementation plan? Do we spend time working on that too? Or
Right, you'll see that there are policy statements. The city should do something to help housing affordability. Is that still the something that we should be doing? Why haven't we done it? Or did we do it and it didn't work? Is there something else that we should be doing? That's the meat of the discussion. The goals are the goals, and they're probably not going to change a whole lot. We have general agreement on the goals, I think. How do we get there is the meat of the discussion, and the review of what's happened, what's been successful, what hasn't, what are the barriers, what should we do differently. That's the implementation piece, and the plan can direct the city to do something different in the future if it's appropriate. The city should review the zoning code for the subdivision ordinance is a perfect example of something that there's a policy statement in the plan. The city should update the subdivision ordinance, and to whatever the goal is, whatever the policy is. That's the kind of direction that you look for in the plan, so that when you go to do the subdivision ordinance, you have that basis, that policy basis. What are we trying to accomplish?
So there's a lot of specificity there, and I guess my request, when I look at the schedule for these meetings, it's like bang, bang, bang. And a lot of this would be really useful to see your staff ideas ahead of time on kind of what you think the issues are and all that, so that we can talk about it.
Yeah, and we didn't expect that you were going to get through this entire plan in 3 meetings. These are just the next steps. I mean, it's
First 3.
Yeah.
it's going to take time, and I think, we were sort of thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but between now and the end of the year, this is what we'll be doing.
But the first 3, see, I'm a little worried just if I think about the first 3, is it a sort of a generalized discussion and then we revisit the same topics again later with more information and get into the specifics, or do you pick the first thing on your...
I think we want to get started. Don't we want to get started? I think we want to get started. So we pick the first one on the list and get started.
Maybe we should start with one that we all, a lot of people identified, with the housing choices and affordability. Start there and see, where that goes. But there's going to be areas that spin off of that, other ideas, other areas of focus as you dig into one. Like you said, you got to start with the work. I'd say we start there, and then.
Yeah, go ahead. I was definitely thinking that along those lines. I just want to make sure we got the materials that we would need to discuss far enough advance so we could have a really informed discussion. And I just saw the schedule and realized these are just piling up pretty fast here. And so I don't know what information we need before the meetings in order to have a fruitful use of our time. Yep. That's all. I'm concerned about that.
It's a good point, and that's probably why I'm starting to lean more and more towards specificity in these topics, because if we give too broad of feedback to staff, they're going to not be able to bring us anything specific to review. We'll just continue in this vortex of all these big issues. I keep changing my mind. I'm throwing ideas out to see if anything sticks. I want to like create a framework, but I think your comments about economic, what we can do, kind of makes sense, Jeff. You know, there's only so much we can do. We can propose that the city, you know, we could propose a policy regarding tax incentives, but beyond that, maybe there's not too much more. Maybe that, Heather, can you go back to the other screen? Thank you. I mean, maybe that comes off the list. I think housing choice and affordability is clearly a topic that we could give to staff. They could come back and give us specifics on. I like the idea of innovation in planning because I'm just thinking more about that, Cerise, what you talked about, and that's, we need probably more direction in the comp plan about that if we want to push through subdivision ordinance changes and accessory dwelling unit ordinance changes and form-based planning like we talked about in the subdivision discussions in our work session. And that feels to me like a good, that could carry through the whole thing, you know? That even strikes at this idea of sustainability and like parks fees and stuff, you know? Is that, we're kind of using an outdated model, innovation in planning. We can use that to talk about how to change the model of how we look at something. That to me is starting to feel like a good topic. The last one I'm not so sure about.
I think with respect to economic development, we could probably spend, you know, half an hour going over what, just as a reminder of what we just adopted in the chapter and then the implementation plan that staff's working on, so you could see, well, here were the goals that we adopted, here's what we're doing to accomplish those goals. And we'd probably be good. We'd probably be okay with that. You know, innovation is, I mean, that's something to keep in mind with everything we do. We want to be innovative and we want to make sure that our plan directs us to be innovative and to look at new methods. But as a topic, I'm not sure. I mean, it's pretty broad.
Yeah.
It's like sustainability, right? We want to keep sustainability in mind as we discuss all these topics. Innovation is the same thing. We want to constantly be looking for new ways to do things, whether it's, you know, urban villages or housing affordability or economic development, whatever the topic is.
Yeah, I think we should dig into one and see how that conversation goes, and then see what comes from that. You know, if we start finding that, you know, there's a principles that's guiding our discussion through housing choices and affordability, maybe we can, at the next meeting, you know, dig into that and then look at tackling another focus area. You know.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the thing to do, is start with that one and see how it goes, and then when we get through that, maybe the next one will be more obvious to us.
Yeah, so maybe we say that the environmental, economic, and social health of the community is the overriding kind of driving principle. Thank you. And the first topic we're going to discuss in that context is housing choice and affordability. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Garrett?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the only one we seem to all feel really confident with right now. And maybe from that we get more.
I think more will come from it, but we can.
Right.
We
One,
can
you have to start somewhere, right?
Start
and we
there,
have to
yeah.
just
That's a good one to
get
start
going.
with.
And
Yep.
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
how does everybody else feel about that? Any
Well,
comments?
I agree with what Greg was saying, is that some of these things are more techniques that we're going to be using
Yeah.
and not topics in and of themselves. But I don't want to just go delete, because then we lose the overarching concept that that's what we want to be keeping in mind. I think creativity and smart thinking and that kind of thing is an important way of looking at things. Not that we talk about them specifically, but just make sure that we're taking those things into consideration.
And I will say that health as a topic, it will be looked at regardless. Because of our work with the health department, they did an audit of our comp plan, looked at almost all of the chapters, and they're going to be bringing recommendations back. So that's going to be really helpful in this conversation. And I also see the health topic and sustainability as one and the same, and it really is both definitions of the triple bottom line and meeting the needs of the folks that are here now and those in the future. So it's sort of, those are both good concepts that we're going to be looking at regardless.
So that's our direction.
Okay, yeah, so I guess that we'll all head nod around on this direction, but the direction is going to be to start with the housing choice and affordability discussion, you know, in light of the kind of overriding principles that we've all kind of brought up and discussed, and we'll see how far we get on the 6th through that topic.
That sounds good.
Sound good to the commission? Yeah? Okay.
Is the urban village included in that, or is that been eliminated?
I would think that when we get to the land use chapter and we're talking about
Urban village.
housing choice and affordability, that the urban villages is going to be part of that discussion. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think we don't want to lose sight of that topic. The urban village topic is really important. So we'll figure, maybe that's, I mean, maybe we do talk about it to a certain degree with housing, but maybe that's the next one.
Yeah, maybe we find from our discussion of housing choice affordability that needs more its own discussion.
Because it is such a central part of our plan.
Yeah, you know, I want to ask if there's a way that Heather a couple years ago offered me a copy of the comp plan, a hard copy, and the first time I pulled it off the shelf was for tonight's meeting in its entirety. But I think it would be really beneficial for all of us to be able to when we're discussing these topics with you guys, to be able to go to chapter 6, page 4, and actually be able to read the language that's there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's something the city could produce. I have one, and I don't know who else has one, but maybe you don't use it, but it would be great, I think, for us to have that resource.
Tablets, do you have?
If you don't want to print, if you don't want to print all that paper, maybe someone's here to carry, to run us to take us around the comp plan online when we're talking about sections. We just, even now, we're talking about stuff. We need to be able to see what's there to know what we're talking about, I think, intelligently. So whether it's paper copies or whether there's a way to get a resource electronically, I think that's important. I don't know what everybody else thinks about that, but
Yeah, that's a really good point. So who would like a hard copy that doesn't have one now?
Jeff?
Well, the thing about the hard copies is, so I got one a couple years ago, but it's
They
already been
changed.
superseded.
Yeah.
And I couldn't identify where there have been changes in the language here or there, or in the supporting code or whatever else. So it's a bit of a problem because I don't know that, I'd have to look at the date and you'd have to look at whatever's been amended to it. So it's almost better if there's a way to do it electronically.
Well, we can do it
I have,
electronically.
yeah, I have an iPad, so if you send it to me that way, I could do it.
Yeah,
We can
saving
have access
paper,
to it,
getting it accessed up on the
Yeah.
board.
We've got the internet
should do it
hooked
here.
up here.
Yeah.
We'll just roll through
We'll
it
try it
as we
that way
need
and
We
to.
see
should
how it
try it.
works.
Yeah, we should
Yeah,
try it here.
we definitely
Yeah, I think that's a better
should do
idea.
that.
Yeah.
It's more sustainable.
More sustainable and innovative.
Do you have a master copy with changes?
I think the online,
The
One is
online version
continuing.
is supposed to be up to date, but I wouldn't bet my life on it.
okay, well, that was one thing I had in mind. And then the other thing is I want to thank all the commissioners for the discussion because this topic is really dynamic. And as we've just discovered, it's all the different pieces go together. And if we're going to be productive, everyone has to feel comfortable just getting their thoughts out there. And it's going to take some time, but I like this format. It's not going to be like a public hearing format where maybe we run through everybody once and, questions for staff are going to happen. But I personally appreciated the discussion we had. So let's try and keep that in mind. And with that, unless there's any other comments, we'll close the work session portion. All right. And thank you, staff, for giving us feedback.
Sure.
And before we go on to anything else, we usually don't have old or new business, but there was a shoreline committee meeting, and Steve is the chair, and he wants to give a brief report to the Planning Commission on the results of that meeting. So I'd like to do that before we wrap
I
up.
have one thing too.
Oh,
before
and
we
then
go.
we'll go, after that, we'll go to Greg's report. So Steve?
Yeah, I have one report to make, and that was from June 18th, a meeting of the Planning and Development Commission's Shoreline Committee. There were two proposals before the subcommittee. The first was construction of a segment of the Bay to Baker Trail, referred to as the Squalicum Creek Trail, between Orchard Place and Iron Gate Road, Direct impacts to the wetlands were proposed. The second matter was the construction of a new stormwater facilities with the Harris Avenue and 8th Street right-of-ways. At the conclusion of each presentation, the committee recommended to the Planning and Community Development Director each proposal for consideration. End of report.
All right, thank you. And Greg?
So I don't know if all of you heard, but we, the city received an award for the downtown plan. That's, that's two in a row, because we got an award for the Fairhaven plan.
Who gave us that award?
This is a governor's award. It's called Smart Communities Awards. It's an outstanding achievement in creating livable and vibrant communities. The judges, some of their comments were that the plan was a broader look at downtown issues than ever seen before. Another said it was close to a home run, broad, inclusive plan, looked at diversity, crime prevention, and mental health issues. Another said good approach to addressing behavioral and safety issues. And finally, one said that the plan is replicable, appears to have been realistic in its major components, so is expeditiously being implemented. Good lesson for other communities, real public involvement and not just public opportunity. And so I have a certificate for each of you signed by the governor in appreciation of your hard work.
Thank you.
Where do we pick up the paychecks again?
I'm assuming they're giving certificates to the planning department as well, right? Because you guys did most of the hard work. Thank you. Most of, not all.
Something we should be proud of. We don't often take time to celebrate these things. So.
Thank you, Greg.
That's two in a row, so the pressure's on, right? We gotta keep it going, right?
Well, Garrett, you were on the Fairhaven plan. Tom, Jeff. So good work, guys. Yeah, the pressure's on for you guys. All right, well, let's do 3 for 3, and that's it. No other business director. We're gonna meet on the 6th and talk about this topic more. All right, thank you very much.